A storm raged above the castle of our protagonist, the Demon King. Lightning crashed down as the heroes stormed the demonic fortress. They believed justice would always triumph over evil, just like it supposedly had throughout every era. The moment they stepped into the throne room, they finally came face to face with the Demon King. But this king didn't look like some terrifying monster straight out of a nightmare. He looked more like a man burdened by fate itself. He admitted to the heroes that he truly was the ruler of demons, the supreme being who commanded their entire race. The law of the 100th Demon King, Larislia Nord, had long been ignored. Humans viewed demons as creatures born purely for evil. Countless demons had been slaughtered in the name of justice. Eventually, the demons retaliated against humanity. In the end, both sides stood with blades aimed at each other's throats. There was no room left for peace talks, and all of it started for no meaningful reason at all. Whoever won this pointless conflict would end up ruling the world. Humans had always feared overwhelming power. The future Larislia Nord foresaw was one where the world's strongest heroes killed the Demon King. Still, he wasn't worried in the slightest. Both sides already had their weapons pressed against one another's necks. Conversation no longer mattered, especially before a Demon King who possessed absolute power. The heroes gained their strength by overcoming the trials of the spirit gods, and both sides still had hidden cards to play. The battle became brutally intense, but justice prevailed in the end. That had always been history's favorite script, which was exactly why the heroes attacked the Demon King without hesitation. At that moment, he realized these heroes had come fully prepared. Their party included a master swordsman, a saint, and an archmage. Even so, the heroes symbolized justice while the Demon King represented evil. That was why Larislia Nord believed defeating him was, from their perspective, the right thing to do. Even after being pierced through the chest, he continued walking calmly with a faint smile, leaving the swordsman completely confused. Larislia Nord suddenly grew serious and mentioned that his friend's daughter would celebrate her birthday the next day. Her name was Iris, and he had promised to attend her party, but now that he was dying, he knew he would never keep that promise. Tears ran down his face as he feared the demons would be hunted down after his death, and that little Iris might become a target as well. The swordsman didn't know how to respond to the way Larislia Nord spoke. He could tell the Demon King wasn't lying. Larislia Nord laughed softly and said he truly was telling the truth, amused that he still needed to convince the swordsman. He declared that everything both sides had done until now was nothing more than killing each other endlessly. He finished by saying that although the great churches taught demons were servants of evil, humans and demons were ultimately no different from one another. The Demon King slowly began fading away. Even so, he kept speaking, telling the swordsman that if he doubted him, he should witness the truth himself and question the church's teachings about killing demons. He said the hero might eventually come to understand something about demons, or perhaps even the future between demons and humans. The swordsman stayed silent as he listened, then released his sword and told Larislia Nord that he understood what he meant. He placed a hand on the Demon King's shoulder and promised to believe his words and stop discriminating against demons. Larislia Nord smiled faintly and thanked him. At that moment, Larislia Nord realized the swordsman who struck him down was actually a woman. He looked at the other heroes standing before him, knowing it would be the final sight he ever witnessed. One thing he noticed was the saint glaring at him with pure hatred in her eyes. But for someone moments away from vanishing, there was no reason to ask why. And so, the Demon King who lost to the heroes disappeared from the world. The story seems to end happily, except it really doesn't. After Larislia Nord died, he suddenly came back to life without understanding how it was possible. He slowly opened his eyes and immediately saw a woman standing beside him, waiting for him to wake up. The woman smiled warmly and greeted him with a good morning, calling him Luru. Larislia Nord was stunned to see a human woman right in front of him. She reached out toward him, but Luru had no idea what she was trying to do. He raised his own arm and realized it was the tiny arm of a baby. That was when he discovered he had reincarnated as an infant. The woman picked him up, assuming he was hungry already. "Mommy will make your food right away," she said. That was when Luru realized this woman was his mother in this new life. As she gently held him, he felt an unfamiliar warmth. It was strangely comforting. He wanted to think about everything happening around him, but his consciousness slowly faded away. Among demons, there was an old myth saying that within the endless cycle of life and death, creatures could transcend species and be reborn in entirely different forms. It was a legend every demon had heard before. Luru never imagined he would experience it himself. Even now, he still remembered his days beside his comrades and the moment he was defeated by the heroes. He couldn't understand why he had reincarnated while still retaining the Demon King's memories. Eventually, he concluded there had to be some reason behind it. But no matter how much he thought about it, there was nothing he could do for now, since his current body could only eat and sleep. Honestly, baby spawn with endgame memories is already unfair. Back then, his life had always been filled with official duties and constant battles. Now, as a baby, he was completely free. But instead of enjoying it, he found it irritating. He wanted to gather information immediately, yet had no way to do it. He looked around the room and noticed a maid nearby. Part of him wanted to bother her just to ask how many years had passed since the hero defeated the Demon King. Unfortunately, babies aren't exactly known for deep conversations. He could only hope time would move faster so he could act on his own. At that moment, the maid grabbed a staff and casually used magic to heat water. She chanted, "Crimson flame appear," and a fire suddenly ignited. Larislia Nord watched carefully and instantly recognized it as magic. But he couldn't understand why the maid needed such awkward wording just to cast a simple spell. To him, basic magic shouldn't require chance or tools at all. That realization made him uneasy because he planned to use magic himself in this new body. He wondered how much magical energy he currently possessed, though he was certain humans naturally had far less mana than demons. Larisli and Nord clenched his fists, and magical energy suddenly wrapped around his body. He tried not to get his hopes up, but that overwhelming amount of mana felt incredibly familiar. He soon realized that not only had his memories remained intact, but his magical power had followed him as well. After activating it, he felt the same overwhelming presence he once had as the Demon King, though he still couldn't control the flow as smoothly as before. He assumed it was because he was now human, or simply because his body was still underdeveloped. But with proper training, he believed his current magic would become more than enough. Eventually, the maid left the room, leaving him completely alone. Without power, he would end up destroyed just like in his previous life. But for now, being a baby at least meant nobody would disturb him while he slept. He was convinced he could train without regrets despite his weak body. 7 years later, Luru was inside a library. At that moment, he was using magic. With a simple movement of his fingers, he stacked several books together. The books lined themselves up perfectly without a single mistake. Luru, now a 7-year-old boy, was honestly a little worried, but he was still happy he had regained the ability to use magic to some extent. He even believed he might already be capable of large-scale spells, but the power was so dangerous it could wipe out an entire village, so he couldn't risk testing it. Yeah, accidental village deletion would be a rough conversation. Besides his magic, he had also learned many things since the day the hero defeated him. Several thousand years had passed since then. No wonder everything felt completely different to him now. As he stared out the window, his mother walked into the room and smiled after noticing him reading ancient demon myths again. She already knew Luru kept rereading the same book over and over, and Luru admitted he simply found the legends fascinating. The ancient demons who once fought humanity in war. Now those demons were treated as little more than questionable myths. Luru really loves books, huh? Maybe this is just the phase where he gets obsessed with fantasy stories, his mother said while ruffling his hair. Luru simply smiled in response, knowing nobody would believe ancient demons ever truly existed. Still, he believed some survivors from that era were probably still alive somewhere. Demons possessed far greater life force and much longer lifespans than humans. Maybe only a few remained. Luru believed he could find them if he searched the world, but as a 7-year-old, he couldn't even leave the village yet. His mother then told him that his father, Patrick Caddis Nora, would be returning home soon. She had received a letter saying her husband would arrive in about 2 weeks, and she hoped Patrick Caddis Nora would bring more books back for Luru to read. Patrick Caddis Nora was a swordsmanship instructor for the Knights of the Kingdom of Leonard, and also the Lord of Caddis Nora village. He was Luru's father. Luru was genuinely happy to hear the news and looked forward to receiving more sword training from him. Suddenly, his mother panicked after remembering something important. She admitted she had gotten distracted for a moment, though Larisli Nord had no idea why. Then she reminded him that he had promised to play with Rush and the others and that it was already time to meet them. Without hesitation, she pushed him right out of the room. Worried he would be late, Luru hurried off, and once he reached the meeting spot, he saw his friend Rush waving at him. Rush was standing there alongside 2 other children, both girls. The group immediately started teasing Luru for arriving late. Rush placed his hands on his hips and angrily reminded Luru that they had promised to meet that day. Larisli Nord felt a little guilty. He knew he was at fault, so he apologized and explained that he got delayed because he was busy reading books. Rush quickly changed moods and wondered if reading books was even fun. He then proudly told Luru that a real boy should read adventure stories instead. He also confidently declared that one day he would become an adventurer. Bro already picked the protagonist class. While Rush kept bragging, Luru simply listened quietly. Even so, he still felt strangely out of place around them. May suddenly interrupted, pointing out that Rush dreamed of becoming an adventurer despite failing Patrick Caddis Nora's swordsmanship test. Rush immediately complained that she was being way too harsh. At the same time, he wondered when he and his family would finally be able to leave the village. Luru grew slightly annoyed listening to them argue, while their other friend Yuri agreed that May had gone a little too far. She believed having dreams was important, which was why she let Rush keep chasing his goal of becoming an adventurer. Rush and May immediately started arguing while Yuri tried to calm them down, but neither of them listened. These 3 had been Luru's childhood friends ever since his reincarnation. Both girls secretly had feelings for Rush, so they didn't want him leaving the village, but Rush was completely oblivious to it. Maybe he truly had no clue, but watching the whole situation amused Luru a little. Anyway, Rush, didn't you say something special was happening today? Luru asked with his arms crossed. You looked pretty excited about it too. Rush and May stopped arguing, and Rush turned toward Luru with a grin. Today's the day. They're finally coming. Real adventurers, he declared. The other 3 were stunned after hearing that. Luru pointed out that Rush had mentioned adventurers occasionally passed through the village before. Rush quickly replied that the people Yuri talked about were just ordinary merchants. The ones he meant now were high-level adventurers, the type who explored unknown lands and eventually became legends. And according to him, they were heading to the village right now. He invited everyone to come watch the adventurers arrive at the village entrance. Though Luru looked completely uninterested while the girls seemed confused about why Rush was so obsessed with adventurers in the first place. Even so, the 3 followed Rush toward the entrance. Rush got incredibly excited when he spotted several people gathered near the gate. He thought the adventurers had already arrived, only to instantly collapse in disappointment after realizing they were just regular villagers. Bro got emotionally comboed in seconds. Rush looked crushed while Luru suggested the adventurers were probably still on their way. Even then, Rush convinced himself there had to be a reason they were delayed. He immediately sprinted toward the front of the village, hoping to get answers himself. The two girls called out for him to stop, but Rush yelled back for them to stay there and wait until he returned with the adventurers. Luru smiled slightly, wondering why adventurers would suddenly appear in such a remote village. He remembered that adventurers were people who explored dangerous regions and hunted monsters. Back in his era, that profession hadn't even been necessary. Yet now, even lands that used to be controlled territory somehow seemed abandoned and unexplored. He assumed it might simply be the result of time passing, though another thought still lingered in his mind. His train of thought was suddenly interrupted when he heard someone scream. What shocked him was seeing a monster appear out of nowhere and charge directly toward Rush. The moment he saw it, Luru instantly activated his magical power. He assumed the creature had come from the nearby forest. He was about to attack the monster himself and save Rush, but then he froze after sensing another spell being cast by someone else. It came from an elf who unleashed a spell called Demon King Venus Vortex, trapping the monster as it lunged toward Rush. At the same time, a warrior leaped down from above with full intent to kill the creature. The warrior remained unbelievably calm and even smiled in the middle of the chaos. He then sliced through the monster with his massive sword, spraying blood everywhere. Luru witnessed the entire scene clearly. For once, he was left speechless. Meanwhile, the warrior stood protectively in front of Rush, who was now sitting frozen on the ground after nearly becoming monster food. The monster disappeared moments later after being instantly killed by the warrior. The warrior stood up and got Rush's attention just to ask whether he had been hurt anywhere. Rush stared at him in shock after realizing the hunter standing before him was a real adventurer. His eyes sparkled as he shouted that the warrior was amazing. The two girls quickly rushed over and reminded him to thank them before completely losing his mind from excitement. Rush immediately listened, and both adventurers replied that they were simply glad nobody got injured. Luru still couldn't say a word. His eyes remained fixed on the elf because her appearance felt strangely familiar to him. "Miss, are you a spirit?" Rush asked. "Your magic is incredible, and you've got pointed ears too." The elf smiled at him and explained that his guess was close, but not quite right. "I'm an elf, a race created after the spirits. My name is Yumis, nice to meet you," she said with a warm smile. The warrior also introduced himself as Grandy, and explained that he traveled alongside Yumis as an adventurer. Luru smiled faintly while looking at them, knowing he had never sensed such enormous magical power inside the village before. To him, both Yumis and Grandy were highly capable individuals. Yumis noticed how much Rush admired adventurers, so she mentioned that many children dreamed of becoming one someday. She then asked Rush if he truly wanted to become an adventurer. Rush answered immediately without even hesitating. He even raised his hand and shouted that he wanted to become a real adventurer one day. Yumis proudly declared that she had been right about him. Meanwhile, Grandy laughed after seeing a kid who admired adventurers so much. He ruffled Rush's hair and told him he wouldn't call the dream impossible, but only if Rush trained seriously and truly committed himself to it. He also warned the boy that becoming an adventurer without proper skills would only get him killed. Rush answered that he understood, causing Grandy to laugh again and praise his response. He even said Rush had potential. Grandy then grabbed Rush by the shoulder and said he would tell him adventure stories later as long as Rush guided him to the inn first. May and Yuri quietly watched the interaction unfold. May complained that Grandy was making Rush way too excited, while Yuri wondered if boys ever truly changed no matter how old they got. The two girls quickly ran after Grandy and Rush together. Yumis then asked Luru if things were difficult for Yuri and May because of Rush dreaming about becoming an adventurer. With his arms crossed, Luru casually answered that it was just a classic love triangle. "Oh? And you're not part of some love square yourself?" Yumis teased. Luru looked at her in confusion before calmly replying that he was only an observer. To Yumis, Luru seemed unusually mature, while the two girls felt adorable in comparison. She even told him he should claim his territory already. But to Luru, that advice definitely wasn't something you should tell a child. He smiled at Yumis and confidently said it was way more entertaining to simply watch the three of them stuck in that love triangle. Yumis became curious because Luru genuinely acted more like an adult than a child. She eventually took back her earlier comment and told Luru he had terrible taste instead. Luru replied that her words were harsh, but still offered to guide her to the inn since she and Grandy were probably exhausted by now. Yumis admitted she really was tired because they had been attacked by monsters on the way to the village. She also felt relieved that at least one kid in the village was showing her proper hospitality. Meanwhile, everyone headed to a tavern for drinks. Children were allowed inside, though they could only drink juice. Grandy and Yumis kept teasing each other while Luru sat nearby alongside his mother. Luru couldn't understand why they were all there since both adventurers had claimed they were exhausted and should have been resting already. His mother, however, looked extremely happy and hoped the adventurers would continue being kind to both the villagers and Luru. Rush's eyes practically sparkled every time he looked at Yumis and Grandy. At that point, Luru realized Rush, the girls, and even his own mother were completely fascinated by adventurers. Meanwhile, one of the men sitting nearby was just an ordinary villager. Someone asked Yumis and Grandy if they had come to investigate the ruins located outside the village. According to Yumis, nobody knew when those ruins had been built or what their original purpose was because they were incredibly ancient. Yumis then stated that although people claimed the ruins were nothing special, she personally doubted that was true. In her opinion, they were most likely built by the ancient demons. Luru was surprised the moment he heard the word demons, because it was the first time anyone had mentioned them since his reincarnation in the village. Yumi stood confidently while sharing her theory with everyone, as if discovering something like that would be easy. Still, even if someone did find evidence, there would be no way to confirm the ruins actually belonged to the ancient demons. Grandy agreed with that point, which immediately annoyed Yumi's. Luru smiled slightly because he actually agreed with Grandy too. He knew ruins could exist literally anywhere. At the same time, he himself could identify ruins connected to the ancient demons with a single glance, though proving it was another matter entirely. Besides, demons now existed only as myths in people's minds. May raised her hand and asked Grandy if adventurers always investigated ruins. Grandy answered that they usually didn't and explained that most of his work involved hunting monsters instead. According to him, exploring ruins and joining tournaments were simply hobbies. This time they had only come because Yumi's wanted to visit the area, and because she enjoyed participating in tournaments. He proudly stated that he joined whenever he got the chance. Luru quietly wondered if that wasn't exactly the point of being an adventurer in the first place. They explored whatever interested them without being tied down by anything. These two truly embodied what adventurers were supposed to be. Luru could tell both Yumi's and Grandy were genuinely enjoying their journey through the village. At that moment, Rush suddenly stepped toward Grandy with a clenched fist and a determined look. "I really want to become an adventurer. I needed help earlier, but I'll work harder and improve my sword skills. So please, accept me as your apprentice," Rush pleaded. But Grandy immediately refused him. Rush nearly burst into tears because he never expected Grandy to reject him. Grandy then explained that being an adventurer wasn't all exciting jobs and heroic moments, especially at the beginning. There were countless difficult tasks too, and he wasn't capable of taking care of Rush until he officially became an adventurer himself. Since Grandy clearly didn't want to accept him as an apprentice right away, Rush quickly changed his request. He asked if he could become Grandy's apprentice after becoming an adventurer on his own first. Suddenly, Grandy burst out laughing and said he had no choice anymore. Since Rush was that persistent, Grandy finally agreed. "When that day comes, I'll become your master. Though I can't promise I'll teach you much," he added. Rush froze in shock before immediately thanking him. Meanwhile, Luro smiled while watching the exchange, thinking Grandy was surprisingly skilled at negotiating. At the same time, Luro's mother looked happy seeing how excited Rush was, though she wasn't entirely convinced Rush's condition of, "if I become one," was actually reassuring. Luro, however, was certain Rush would be fine because his father had often said the boy possessed real talent. He firmly believed Rush would eventually become a proper apprentice when the time came. Nearby, May and Yuri continued chatting together. May complained that becoming Grandy's future apprentice had only made Rush even more motivated. Yuri agreed with her. She knew it was good for Rush, but part of her still felt worried. While the two talked, Yumi suddenly appeared beside them and asked what they were discussing. The girls screamed in surprise, causing Yumi's to immediately apologize for startling them. Then she casually mentioned that she simply wanted to join the girls' conversation and quickly concluded that May and Yuri were struggling with love problems. Yuri and May were completely shocked after hearing that. Both of them instantly denied it and claimed they were only worried because Rush was so clumsy. Yumi's laughed because she had never mentioned anyone's name in the first place. She then looked at Rush and said she was sure he would achieve his dream someday. After that, she asked the girls if they could really stay behind in the village and simply watch Rush leave when that day finally came. The two girls immediately fell silent, unable to answer her question. Luckily, the tavern owner clapped his hands and announced that it was already late, which meant all the children had to head home. The kids shouted in protest, but there was no arguing against that decision. Luru and his mother also stood up to leave, but before walking out, Luru glanced at Grandy and Yumi's, thinking the two adventurers were surprisingly interesting. He hoped he would get the chance to hear more stories from them later. The adventurers waved goodbye to the children while the three kids clearly didn't want to leave, though their parents were already dragging them home. Luru quietly wondered how long it had been since his life last felt this lively. The loneliness that comes after a fun gathering. No matter how many years passed, that feeling never changed for him. At that moment, his mother called his name. She stared up at the night sky as if there was something she wanted to ask him. Luru asked what it was, but she ultimately chose not to say anything. Luru smiled faintly because he understood she already knew that someday, once he grew older, he would leave the village. The following day, Luru headed into the forest. He carried a wooden sword while practicing his sword techniques. He repeatedly swung at the air before unleashing a powerful strike. After finishing his training, he wiped away his sweat and decided to stop for the day. At the same time, he remembered that his father was one of the kingdom's finest knights, meaning if he accidentally revealed the power of the former demon lord, his father would definitely notice. As he walked home, he planned to improve a little more before the next training session. While passing through the area, he noticed several villagers searching frantically for something. The moment they spotted him, they asked where he had been and whether he was alone. Luru answered that he was by himself and asked what was going on. One of the women looked terrified as she explained that Rush and the others had gone missing. Luru froze after hearing that. The woman admitted she couldn't find Rush anywhere. According to her, the children had been missing since that morning, and she remembered how badly they refused to leave the tavern the previous night. She concluded that the kids had probably sneaked out without permission. Luru agreed with her assumption. He carefully recalled yesterday's conversation and remembered Yumi's mentioning ruins near the village. Luru had never visited them before, but he guessed they were located on the opposite side of the village. Without hesitation, he started running while telling the woman he would search for his friends. The woman warned him not to head somewhere dangerous, but Luru simply replied that he would do his best, and that protecting the children came first. He was willing to go as far as necessary because those children were his first friends since becoming human. When he reached the forest near the village, he immediately found Yumi's. He stared directly at her, and she noticed him as well. To his surprise, Yumi suddenly ordered him to stay back while activating her magic to create a barrier around the village. "O innocent spirits dwelling within this forest, lend me your strength. In exchange for my mana, create a wall that protects all life." That was the chant she recited, but Lyrislia Nord immediately told her to stop. He informed Yumis that Rush and the other children had disappeared. Yumis was shocked after hearing that news. Luru then explained that his friends were probably no longer inside the village and that people suspected they had gone toward the ruins. He wanted to ask Yumis to send adults to search the ruins, but suddenly she flinched and apologized because she could no longer stop the spell. At that moment, the arcana of the mystic barrier fully activated, sealing the village so nobody could leave until the spell disappeared. Luru shouted, "What?" after realizing she had truly activated it. Yumis told him he needed to understand because protecting the villagers was her priority. She was about to explain further when something suddenly interrupted them. It was a magical machine, and according to Yumis, those creatures had emerged from the ruins. Several more of the machines were already flying toward the village. That was why she had rushed there to activate the barrier in the first place. After seeing everything unfold, Luru realized the situation was becoming serious. He also figured out that the legs of those magical machines were essentially magical cannons. On top of that, he recognized them as weapons originally created by demons for killing humans. The magical machines immediately began attacking the village, but thanks to Yumis's barrier, everyone remained safe, though the villagers were terrified as expected. One thing Luru feared was the possibility that these creatures could fly toward nearby villages and cities to slaughter defenseless people. As Yumis explained, the ruins themselves hadn't seemed unusual at first while they were preparing to return to the village. Then suddenly, the walls of the ruins collapsed, and Grandy was likely still fighting the giant magical machine there. From everything she described, Lyrislia Nord became certain the magical machines had originally been sealed inside the ruins. Someone had clearly prepared that place for them. One thing he knew for certain was that there had to be some kind of device controlling those machines. He then informed Yumis that he needed to go somewhere immediately. Yumis looked shocked and worried after hearing that. She apologized and firmly stated that she had no intention of removing the barrier. She also told Luru there was nothing he could do because he was still just a child. Besides, only the caster herself could decide who was allowed to pass through the barrier. She ordered Luru to return home, but he stubbornly refused. He activated Barrier Huntingly, and magical power burst from his body. Then, right before Yumis's eyes, he forced his hand through the barrier itself. Seeing that happen, Yumis was completely stunned because she had never granted Luru permission to pass through it. Luru looked at her and said, "Sorry, but I'll have to rewrite the magic formula with this. This barrier belongs to me now too." Yumis was confused because rewriting another person's magic should have been impossible. Yet despite that, Luru passed straight through the barrier, which shocked Yumis even more. Before heading toward the ruins, Luru warned Iris that he was slightly worried about the barrier's durability. So he strengthened it further and reinforced it using Yumis's mana. On top of that, Yumis herself could no longer leave the barrier now. He also adjusted the same conditions for crossing it in case Rush and the others returned safely. Luru asked Yumis to take care of his friends for him. "I'm counting on you. I'll bring Rush and the others back," he said. Then he sprinted out of the village toward the ruins. Yumis shouted for him to stop, but he completely ignored her. After he disappeared, Yumis stood there in confusion because she had never imagined Luru possessed such incredible magical talent. Meanwhile, Luru arrived at the ruins. At that moment, Grandy was still there alongside the children while being surrounded by several monsters. He explained to the kids that the monsters were currently active, but they hadn't attacked yet. However, they might react if something moved nearby. Because of that, he ordered the children not to move until he gave the signal. As expected, Rush, May, and Yuri were terrified. Grandy admitted that in the current situation, there wasn't much he could do. Suddenly, Luru appeared and called out to Grandy. Grandy looked shocked after seeing him there. He immediately asked why Luru had come and what happened to Yumis. Luru explained that Yumis was back at the village, creating a barrier to protect everyone. Grandy instantly got angry that Luru had come all the way there and ordered him to hide behind him with the others. Luru felt relieved after confirming everyone was unharmed. He then shifted his attention toward the monsters surrounding Grandy. He recognized those monsters as Arunt units, machines originally created for civil labor. Though in emergencies, they could also be repurposed for combat. Even so, Luru was convinced that he alone could stop those titans. Besides, he had no intention of backing off and forcing Grandy to fight alone. The abyss cannons flying toward the village possessed terrifying attack accuracy. Luru concluded these titans likely served the same purpose and could strike targets from long range. He started walking toward the titans while Grandy repeatedly told him to stop. But Luru ignored him completely, even while Grandy practically begged him to come back. His friends also panicked and begged him to stop because the titans were dangerous. Luru glanced back at them briefly and calmly assured them there was nothing to worry about. He also told Grandy he was counting on him. As he approached the monsters, the titan's eyes suddenly lit up. The moment he noticed that, Luru remained perfectly calm. He stopped walking and waited for the titans to attack him, but nothing happened. The monsters simply stared at him. Luru then declared that he had discovered their limit. He concluded that as long as nobody approached the ruins themselves, the Titans wouldn't attack. Grandy suggested that protecting the ruins was probably their primary function. Luru agreed and admitted he couldn't think of any other reason the Titans would guard the ruins so carefully. He stared directly at the ruins, certain he had no memory of ever building a place like that. Because of that, he believed the ruins were probably constructed after his death. He told Grandy he needed to go inside just to confirm something. As expected, Grandy refused to let him go any farther or risk his life. Besides, he believed the entire incident was their fault to begin with. "Just stay quiet and come back here," Grandy added. Just like Yumi's, he believed Illyrislia Nord was too weak to fight because he was still only a child. "So you're saying it's fine as long as someone's strong enough, right?" Luru asked. He confidently stated that anyone truly capable should be allowed to enter the ruins. Grandy admitted he wasn't wrong, and the instant he did, Luru dashed straight toward the ruins while Grandy yelled for him to return. Luru charged directly at the Titans, instantly triggering their detection systems. The Titans raised their giant swords and prepared to strike him down, but Luru leaped high into the air using magic. Then he clenched his fist and slammed a powerful punch into one of the Titans. Grandy and the three children stared in complete shock. After displaying that overwhelming strength, Luru landed back on the ground while magical power still surrounded him. The two Titans immediately locked their eyes onto him. Luru stared back with a smile on his face. One of the Titans swung its weapon at him, but he blocked the attack effortlessly. Then he ripped the weapon from the Titan's hands and turned it against them. Without hesitation, he completely destroyed both remaining Titans. "Yeah, little bro just soloed the boss fight." Grandy stood there in total disbelief and called out Luru's name. Luru looked back at him and casually asked if his abilities had passed the test. Grandy was left speechless. In the end, he allowed Luru to enter the ruins, though only under certain conditions. Ideally, he wanted either himself or Yumas accompanying Luru to guarantee his safety. According to Grandy, the ruins were an important discovery, so letting only a child investigate them would be a serious problem. For now, he planned to escort the other three children back to the village before returning to the ruins as quickly as possible. He also asked Luru not to go any deeper if he managed to stop the machines inside. Grandy then gave Luru two options: either return to the village with him immediately or wait there until he came back. Luru answered that it was fine for Grandy to escort the children first. Afterward, he told his friends to stay safe on their way home. Rush promised him they would and admitted he understood why they couldn't follow Luru. Meanwhile, May confessed they had caused everyone trouble and apologized again while asking Luru to be careful too. After that, they left the ruins while Luru waved goodbye to them. Once Grandy and the children disappeared from sight, Luru turned back toward the entrance and decided to wait for Grandy inside. When he entered, he found the machine responsible for controlling the units roaming around the village. He tried operating it to gather information and discovered there were no more long-range attack machines remaining. Apparently, the machines outside the ruins existed purely for defense purposes. From that, he concluded the ruins may have been built to preserve something important. There also seemed to be a massive chamber located deeper within the ruins. Luru wanted to check it immediately, but then he remembered Grandy had asked him to wait. He had given his word and didn't want to break that promise. So he leaned against the wall in the hallway while waiting for Grandy to return. The sounds echoing through the ruins suddenly reminded him of a similar building from his previous life, where he used to stand surrounded by countless companions. Back then, everyone, including him, was full of energy. The memory made him feel lonely. Thankfully, Grandy soon returned and called out to him. Grandy apologized for being late and noticed the sadness in Luru's eyes. Luru gave a faint smile and lied, saying he was fine. Then he stood up and claimed the ruins were just a little cold. That was why he had been leaning against the wall for a while. Grandy agreed since they were still underground after all. This time, Luru asked whether the magical machinery had already been shut down. Grandy happily confirmed that everything had been disabled perfectly. He knew it was all thanks to Luru, so he asked how he managed to do it. Luru lied again and casually said he had only touched random things. Grandy then reminded him that Yumas was furious about him tampering with her barrier spell. Luru answered that it wasn't a big deal because he could simply rewrite the spell. "Do you even realize how difficult spell rewriting is?" Grandy asked. "Even a skilled archmage would need several minutes. Yumas is a first-class mage, you know." Luru listened quietly, though he genuinely believed rewriting the spell should have been much easier for Yumas since the barrier belonged to her. That made him wonder whether spell rewriting techniques had been lost over time. "Anyway, I'll remove the barrier once we return to the village. More importantly, it looks like there's another chamber ahead. Let's check it out." A few minutes later, they arrived at the room. Luru noted that the door was enormous and covered in strange colored markings. The two stood there for a moment, wondering if this was the deepest part of the ruins. Grandy tried forcing the door open but struggled because it refused to budge. According to him, ruin doors only opened when specific conditions were met. He then suggested there might have been something inside the earlier machine connected to opening the door. But as far as Luru remembered, there was no such function. Besides, going all the way back would be a pain. He touched the door while mentioning there might be another way to open it. The moment his hand made contact, he felt magical energy react and a confirmation signal activated around him. Then a voice echoed through the room, declaring that the person standing outside the door, Luru, matched the identity of Illyrislia Nord, the king of the 100 demons. "Would you like to release the lock?" the voice asked. Luru froze after realizing the door had recognized him as the Demon King. He immediately ordered it to open and the voice replied, "Roger." The red diamond-shaped device above the door began glowing while the center mechanism rotated. The giant door slowly opened wide, leaving both of them unsure whether they should step inside immediately. "Shall we?" Luru asked. Grandy nodded and answered, "Yeah." The two stepped forward, but the instant Luru saw what was inside, he became speechless. At the center of the room stood a giant capsule. Luru instantly recognized it as a long-term hibernation capsule, created for the demon clan. Even after losing the war against humanity, the demons had researched this technology to preserve their future existence. Now Luru wondered whether the experiment had actually succeeded, and he desperately wanted to know if someone was still inside. He slowly walked toward the capsule. His legs trembled as he wondered whether he might finally reunite with his old companions again. He desperately hoped someone was inside. Even while nervous and afraid his assumption might be wrong, he forced himself to check. To his shock, the person inside was Iris, the little girl from his previous life. He had never been able to celebrate her final birthday because he was already prepared to die in that war. At that moment, Luru was overwhelmed with emotion because he never imagined he would see her again after thousands of years. Meanwhile, Grandy suddenly asked what was going on since he had no idea why there was a person inside the ruins. Luru looked toward him, realizing Grandy truly didn't know Iris was one of the ancient demons. That confirmed for him that the traits of demons had completely faded from modern knowledge. Even so, Luru calmly told Grandy he didn't know why there was a girl inside the capsule either. Since he believed Iris was still alive, he suggested they open the capsule. Grandy looked confused and immediately asked how they were supposed to open it. Luru stayed silent for a moment. He remembered that the room's door had opened because of him. Thinking it through, he figured the same method should work again. He stretched out his hand, and the moment he touched the capsule, a red key materialized before him. Then a mechanical voice detected the hibernation device and asked Luru whether he wanted to terminate the process. Luru immediately replied, "Stop. Prioritize the life inside first," and the capsule began to open slowly. Grandy smiled as he realized the small girl inside was still alive. Luru smiled as well when he noticed the same thing. He was left speechless as he looked at Iris, never expecting to see her again. His comrade Bus was Iris's father, and he had witnessed how happy Bus was because of her existence. Iris showed no emotion. Whenever Bus treated her kindly, her mood would shift the moment she saw Luru. As the capsule fully opened, it became clear that Iris's body had not changed at all. Iris opened her eyes and saw both Grandy and Luru, but instantly activated her demonic power, making Grandy assume she was dangerous. Grandy warned Luru, but it was already too late, as Iris attacked and sent him flying. "What are you doing?" Luru asked. He then froze when he realized something was wrong. Iris stood up while Luru remembered that he was now human. And the truth was, humans and demons had been killing each other. "Humans should die," Iris declared, as she launched another attack. She then struck Larislia Nord, unaware that he had been the demon lord thousands of years ago. Her magic released a blinding light. "Sama, I will definitely get my revenge on you," she said, expecting Luru to be hurt by the attack. But she was shocked when she saw that Luru was completely unaffected. Luru absorbed her magic and was moved by how much her abilities had improved. He casually played with the magic, reminiscing about his time as the Demon King. Back then, he used to juggle spheres of magic like toys. He would even play with the children of his siblings. Now, he handled the magic the same way as before. Iris watched him manipulate it effortlessly, and suddenly became emotional as she said, "Larislia Nord." Luru dispersed the magic and called out Iris's name. Larislia Nord had come to see her. He said, "Iris, can you really see Luru?" Then she immediately ran toward him and hugged him tightly while crying. Luru patted her back, feeling slightly awkward being the same height as her now. He glanced at Grandy to check on him, only to notice that he had passed out. He smiled in relief, realizing Grandy had only lost consciousness, but part of him remained concerned, knowing the magical beam Iris used earlier was nearly as strong as the soldiers, and he was certain that Iris's magic had not been this developed before. But now, the difference was enormous. Iris kept crying uncontrollably. Then she felt embarrassed when she noticed Luru laughing. "You're terrible. I was preparing to take revenge on you this whole time," she said. Luru kept laughing and asked why she wanted revenge on him. Iris suddenly grew uneasy as she noticed changes in Luru, trying to make sense of it. She asked why he spoke differently and why he was in someone else's body. She then concluded that he might be hiding after his battle with the heroes. Yeah, her brain was doing overtime. Luru told her to calm down so he could explain everything slowly. Iris realized she had been asking too many questions. She apologized, knowing he couldn't answer properly if she kept interrupting him. She first wanted to know if the man who had been with Luru was still okay after being thrown away by her magic. Luru told her that the man was Grandy and that he was still alive. Iris asked if Grandy was someone close to Luru, clearly worried since she had hurt his companion. On top of that, she hadn't known from the start that Luru was the Demon King. Larislia Nord explained that he had only recently met Grandy, but believed him to be a kind person. He also suggested they could simply say it was an unfortunate accident that caused Grandy to pass out. Iris was impressed and said it was brilliant that he came up with that so quickly. Guru turned away, remarking that it would be inconvenient if Grandy woke up. He then sat down and asked Iris to sit beside him so they could talk before Grandy regained consciousness. He had many questions and hoped she could answer them all. Iris smiled and said she would gladly respond. She sat next to Luru while he wondered which topic they should start with. He expected it would be difficult for her to accept that he was the Demon King now. But Iris immediately said he was wrong. She said that Jazz was Sama and that she had no doubts about Luru at all. Luru asked how she could be so sure he was the Demon King. She smiled and replied that she was certain because of how he manipulated the magic bullets earlier, something only the Demon King could do, especially among non-evil demons. You're saying even Mong couldn't do that? Luru asked. Iris shook her head and said her father wasn't very skilled at controlling magic like that. Luru realized she was right. He then mentioned that Grandpa Mitos might be able to do it, but Iris disagreed again, saying Grandpa Mitos had no interest in anything beyond his research. As Luru recalled his past and the people from his world, a wave of sadness hit him. Tears began to fall as he dismissed it as a simple memory. Yet deep down, he knew his people had always been like that, right? Now he could admit he cared about his siblings more than he once thought. He grew visibly downcast, and Iris noticed immediately. She apologized, assuming she had brought up something painful. Luru shook his head and said that wasn't the case, explaining that just hearing Iris mention his past and those memories actually made him happy. He took a deep breath and said he finally felt at ease, though his body was now undeniably human. Also, your age, what is really going on? Iris asked. Luru was completely at a loss. He had no idea how to explain everything to her. As far as he knew, Iris was not the kind of demon who hated humans, but her earlier reaction said otherwise. She had clearly been furious at them. He concluded that the girl simply couldn't accept reality yet. Clenching his hands, he called out Iris's name with determination. He then revealed the truth without hesitation, saying he had been reincarnated. Of course, Iris was left speechless. She quickly reasoned that after his death, he had been reborn in a human body after a long time had passed. Luru confirmed she was right, and explained that his current life included a human father and mother, who were kind and caring. Iris was stunned, then she admitted she felt relieved after hearing that. She smiled brightly, saying Luru seemed content living as a human now. Because of that, she concluded there was no longer any reason to treat humanity as enemies. According to her, everything she had done was for Luru's sake, though she admitted things had gotten quite violent. Hearing that, Luru had no words. Iris panicked and quickly clarified that the violence she meant wasn't something Leruslia Nord would consider extreme. She insisted she hadn't done anything truly terrible. She gave an example, saying she had gathered some demons to wipe out human forces or sometimes left notes under soldiers' pillows. We only went so far, she said, but from Luru's perspective, that already counts as violence. So after causing all that chaos, does that mean the demon race still hasn't been wiped out? Luru asked. He also reasoned it wouldn't be surprising if humans had started a full campaign to hunt demons. Iris then remembered the campaign he mentioned. That campaign had been organized under the authority of the church. If it had continued, the demons would have been completely eradicated. Luru was shocked and asked if the campaign hadn't gone on. Humanity had united through hatred toward demons, so stopping midway made no sense to him. Iris honestly replied that it wasn't so much that it stopped, but that it couldn't continue. According to Iris, humanity had split into two factions. One followed the church's banner, while the other stood under the hero who defeated Leruslia Nord. Luru became even more confused, thinking the hero had truly fulfilled her promise. Iris then pointed out the irony that the ones who killed the Demon King were now protecting his subordinate. Luru asked what happened to humanity after that, but he had no answers himself. She explained that during her journey, she had been captured, and when she regained consciousness, she was already inside a deep sleep device. Someone had managed to capture a demon without taking any damage. What kind of person could do that? Luru asked. Yeah, that's not your average hunter. According to Iris, the person used some kind of magical device that blocked cognitive senses, and she believed it was a woman based on scent and silhouette. Even so, she didn't know why that person did it, but looking back, she felt grateful. She was thankful because it allowed her to meet Luru again. Leruslia Nord was left speechless, never expecting Iris to have missed him this much. Iris suddenly grabbed his clothes and said she truly cherished the time they spent together. She couldn't forget how he would come play with her and celebrate her birthday every year, even when he felt guilty about neglecting his duties that day. When she heard about his death, she believed she would never speak to him again. To her, this all felt like a dream. At that moment, she broke down crying again, begging Leruslia Nord to fight harder against the heroes and sacrifice himself for his people. Luru gently touched her head and apologized, deciding that he was now human. Because of that, he was certain it would never happen again. There would be no more sacrifices. Iris said she would be happy if things stayed that way. She then stretched slightly and wondered how she could remain by Luru's side now that he was human. Do the other demons feel the same way? She asked. Luru was startled, realizing Iris didn't know about the others. He told the girl to listen carefully. He declared that the era of the demon race had already come to an end. He honestly told Iris that more than 1,000 years had passed, meaning everything had changed. Iris became deeply saddened, assuming that meant the demon race had been completely wiped out. Luru explained that he believed some might still be alive, but demons were now considered ancient beings, treated as legends. I thought I was prepared for this, but now I'm truly alone, separated from everyone I once knew. Before he knew it, he had already started getting used to that feeling. He said that while looking at her sadness. Even so, that thought brought Luru a bit of comfort after his death. He was around 10 years old and believed that this little girl must have witnessed her friends being killed. He kept clenching his fists, wishing he had been able to protect them. Unfair. Instead of blaming anyone, he apologized to Iris, and she finally smiled, saying it was okay. She stood up and told Leruslia Nord that he had done everything he could back then. And if he hadn't been their king, she wasn't sure the demons would have survived long enough for her to exist. Luru had been their hope and did everything to keep them safe. That was why she was at peace with it. Now that Lyrus Leonord Nord had fulfilled his role in protecting the demon race, hearing her kind words left Luru speechless. He smiled, thinking of Bus, as if silently telling him that his daughter had grown into someone remarkable, even if demons were now just legends. If I were seen, they wouldn't just let me go. Yeah, that's a problem, Iris replied. Luru then told her not to worry about that. He explained that Grandy was currently traveling with Yumis, an ancient being. He also believed Grandy hadn't realized earlier that he had been facing a demon. Besides, it wasn't something widely known to the public, and if they wanted to live together, he would have to somehow convince his mother first. Grandy groaned, a sign that he was waking up. He slowly opened his eyes and complained about the pain. He stared at the two children in front of him, while Iris quietly asked Luru to let her stay with them. Luru immediately refused. At that moment, neither of them realized Grandy was already awake. Grandy's eyes widened as he remembered what had happened earlier. The two turned toward him, and Grandy demanded an explanation, while Iris tensed up as she saw him raising his sword. Luru quickly stood in front of him and said it was all a misunderstanding. He assured him she wouldn't attack again. Luru added that Grandy had simply been confused. Grandy admitted he didn't fully understand what Luru meant, but he sheathed his sword after confirming there was no hostility, and asked, "Young lady, why did you attack me?" They then explained that it had been a simple case of mistaken identity. Grandy asked her to clarify. "Sir Grandy, for a moment you look like the enemy of someone very dear to me. You may think it's too late to say this, but I'm truly sorry." Grandy remarked that declaring revenge at such a young age explained how she had gained such powerful magic. "Life's rough, huh?" he added casually. He really just accepted that and moved on. Luru hoped Grandy hadn't realized Iris was actually a demon. "Well, nothing more to say then. If that's the case, let's call it an accident," Grandy said with a smile. Iris felt relieved and realized not all humans were bad. She bowed deeply, thanking Grandy for forgiving her. Grandy told her to drop the formalities, saying it didn't suit her. He then invited the two children to return to the village with him. He suddenly remembered that Iris wasn't from Luru's village. Since she hadn't been with them before arriving here, Luru said that was exactly what he wanted to discuss. He explained that Iris had been trapped and left in that capsule after being caught in an enemy trap, and now he was thinking of letting her stay in his village. Grandy nodded, saying that made sense, as leaving her alone would likely send her to the slums. He agreed to let Iris come with them, and she was overjoyed. They left the ruins, and Luru mentioned that the place might have once belonged to the demon race. He couldn't prove it, but he was certain there was a connection. He felt grateful for coming to that ruin and finding Iris again. There were still many truths about ancient demons and the demon lord that he couldn't share with anyone. But now, he was glad he could talk about it with the only one of his kind left. Iris looked at him and he returned her gaze with a smile. At that moment, he had no words. "This is exciting, but Yumis isn't here today. So let's do a full investigation another time," Grandy said. Grandy also believed they would be busy from now on after discovering such incredible ruins. "You're going to get pretty famous, huh? I'm kind of jealous," Grandy joked. Luru replied, "What are you talking about? You'll be busy too, you know." Grandy answered in a way that confused both Luru and Iris. He then said Luru should also get credit, since he explored the ruins alongside him. Relia Nord replied that no one would believe it, since he was just a 7-year-old kid. "What do you mean? Anyone would believe it. How could I not spread the word in style?" Grandy said proudly. Luru smiled at that, while Iris was surprised, never expecting humans to be this kind. Luru then grew uneasy when he heard Grandy mention it, realizing he might also talk about how Luru handled the barrier earlier. Grandy even brought up how bad his and Yumi's drinking habits were. Luru paused for a moment, thinking that he didn't want to live in hiding anymore. He also didn't want to be exposed as some kind of demon lord and didn't care about being recognized for his abilities. He realized that standing out too much and getting involved would only bring trouble. After thinking for a while, Grandy told him he had only been joking about spreading the story. But if Lyruslia Nord wanted to claim the achievement, he would gladly make it known. Still, he believed Lyra wouldn't want that to happen. So he told Lyruslia Nord to relax and promised to keep quiet for now. "Even your jokes are top tier, Lyra," he added. Grandy then reminded him that he was the one who brought it up in the first place. They kept walking as Lyruslia Nord figured Grandy's comment was just a comeback to his own joke. Besides, it felt like Grandy never planned to spread the story anyway. He smiled, thinking Grandy was someone he could trust. They continued walking, and he considered returning to the ruins the next day or the one after, even wondering if he should allow Grandy to share the story. Then suddenly, the ruins collapsed into pieces. All three froze, stunned by the noise. Slowly, they turned and looked at the ruins. Grandy looked upset at first, but then accepted there was nothing he could do. Respect. Besides, things like this tended to happen whenever he was around Yumi's. He told himself he should get used to it, though it still hurt knowing their only gains were the village's magic device and scattered giant parts. Iris told him that was better than nothing. Grandy agreed, but Iris still asked why he seemed down. Rudd forced a smile and said Yumis would probably cry after hearing the ruins collapsed before they could loot them. Yeah, that's one way to ruin the plan. They decided to drop it and head back to the village. As they got closer, Luru grew nervous, knowing he'd soon face Yumis. Both the structure and efficiency of Yumi's magic were incredible, and she had completely rewritten his proud barrier. He assumed she was likely inside it, and he was right. Yumi's was already waiting for them, The moment Luru saw the elf, his nerves spiked. Something about her aura felt different, and she was glaring at him with clear anger. Just as he was about to explain, she cut him off, angrily calling him an idiot and shouting that he went off alone without listening. She questioned why he altered the spell formulas and demanded to know the purpose of the final barrier. He glanced at Grandy and Iris for help, but Grandy just shook his head and said once Yumesin starts, there's no stopping her. Iris simply smiled, looking oddly nostalgic watching him get scolded. Yumis raised her voice, asking if he was even listening and what would have happened if he had been surrounded by machines outside the barrier. She shouted that in such a situation, no one could have saved him, continuing her lecture until he grew dizzy and slowly collapsed. Minutes later, Yumis calmed down and asked if he understood. I understand, he answered. She explained she had ensured Rush and the others returned home safely, and confirmed his parents knew nothing about his magic. Instead, she told them he was with his grandfather and completely safe. Then she warned him he would need to handle sensitive matters on his own, and he agreed, thanking her. She asked if he could dismantle the barrier, saying she had tried many times but failed. Iris calmly touched the barrier and shattered it with ease, leaving Yumis completely stunned. She couldn't believe it, but Iris just smiled and casually asked if everything wasn't fine after all. He called out to Iris in concern as Yumis trembled in fear. Iris explained that Yumis had gone too far with the scolding, so as her subordinate, she only wanted a little payback. He said she could have just stopped Yumis earlier, but Iris replied that she understood why Yumis was angry and wouldn't interfere. Grandy then pointed out that a lot had happened that day, and suggested they wrap things up and regroup tomorrow. He told Yumis he would escort everyone back, so she should return to the inn. Iris agreed, though she kept staring at Iris. Then she pointed at both of them, and said they would explain everything properly later. The next day, she stepped away, and Grandy told him to lead the way. Not long after, they arrived at Luru's house, where his mother was waiting outside. He froze when he saw her standing there, staring at him with a blank expression. She asked where he had been, and he replied that he had just gone to the ruins. Suddenly, she slapped him. He stayed calm, simply looking at her. As she broke into tears, she approached him, dropped to her knees, and hugged him tightly, trembling. She asked if he understood how worried she had been. I messed up, but I had to go, he admitted. He knew that himself. She was surprised by his honesty and smiled, realizing it couldn't have been avoided. Then she turned to the grandfather and asked if he had been helpful. The grandfather answered that he definitely had, explaining that the ruins' magic machine had been on the verge of attacking the village. If Luru hadn't stopped it, the village would likely have been in serious danger. Hearing that, she felt relieved and wondered if it was because Luru had trained in martial arts under Patrick Cadis Nora. Grandy, however, knew better than to say anything. Luru's mother then noticed Iris and asked who she was. She questioned whether it was true that Iris wasn't from the village. Iris greeted her politely and introduced herself. She explained that due to certain events, she had been asleep inside the ruins and was rescued by them. Luru's mother stood up and asked what she meant by ruins. Iris explained that she had lost someone dear and, while seeking revenge, fell into an enemy trap. Many years had passed while she slept, meaning her parents were likely no longer alive. Luru's mother felt sympathy and immediately hugged her, saying that must have been incredibly painful. She couldn't believe someone so young had no one to rely on. Then she insisted that Iris should come live with them. Iris politely refused, saying she couldn't accept food and shelter after already having her life saved. Luru's mother assumed she was just being humble and dismissed her refusal. She turned to Luru and asked if she was right to think he also wanted Iris to stay with them. He paused in confusion, then said it was fine. He had planned to convince his mother anyway, but somehow things flipped on him. Now his mother, full of excitement, told Iris to become their daughter. She grabbed Iris by the shoulders and excitedly declared she would send a letter to Patrick Cadis Nora, confident he would agree instantly. Yeah, that escalated fast. Iris tried to calm her by calling her ma'am, but she rejected the term and insisted she call her mother instead. Iris was taken aback but went along with it. Luru's mother then lifted her up and happily declared that she was adorable and now officially her daughter. Iris looked at him in panic, silently asking what to do, but he simply shook his head, telling her to accept the affection. Grandy wondered if this was actually a good thing, noting that becoming the daughter of a noble wasn't easy. Grandy then said his goodbyes, mentioning he would head back to the inn. He reminded Luru to come by after breakfast the next day since he had something to discuss, adding that Iris should come along too. Luru agreed. His mother told them to go to bed early that night while holding Iris's hand. Grandy walked away, and his mother thanked him. Luru looked at the two women, unable to believe that his friend's daughter was now his sister, but he was glad everyone was safe. The next morning, he and Iris arrived at the inn. He opened the door to Grandy and Yumis' room while apologizing for being late, but was caught off guard when Yumis said they were the ones who were late. Her eyes were locked on him with a serious expression. She then asked where they should begin once everyone was seated. He asked what the discussion was about. Grandy started by asking if it was correct to assume he had modified Yumis' barrier the previous day and where he had learned such a technique. He replied that it was an extremely important secret and that he didn't mind explaining, but in exchange they would have to swear an oath right there. Yumi said she understood and swore she wouldn't tell anyone. However, when he looked at her, he saw a red line surrounding her and calmly stated that she was lying. He explained that he had cast a lie detection spell in the room. She said she hadn't felt any magical energy flow, but he simply asked if they should test it. He then asked her favorite food, and she answered meat. Then asked who her best friend was, and she said Melia. Finally, he asked what she would want to be if reborn, and she answered a bird. He then stated seriously that every answer she gave had been false from the start, and asked if he was correct, leaving her stunned. She then admitted that the spell had indeed been cast, but reassured him that she truly had no intention of spreading his secret. He asked if it was true that she still planned to tell at least someone, and she admitted that she did, since as adventurers they were obligated to report major discoveries to the guildmaster. He said he understood her position, but he couldn't reveal the truth behind those circumstances. If anything were to be shared, it would have to be under a magical contract. Grandy then told Yumis that this was exactly why he had warned her not to treat Luru like an ordinary child. Yumis asked if that had really been Grandy's impression. She explained that she hadn't spoken with him much before, and only wanted to better understand his character. She apologized for trying something like that, and he could tell she was being sincere. He asked if she still intended to report the incident, and she replied that she would try to keep it hidden as much as possible. However, if the guildmaster exercised authority, she would have no choice but to comply. She then asked if she was correct in assuming he could use contract magic, and whether he could teach it, if it could be sealed that way. She admitted she hadn't originally planned to ask, since altering magic seemed too complex to share, but if she couldn't speak about it, then she wouldn't be able to report anything anyway. Anyway, he understood her point and asked Grandy if he agreed. Grandy replied that he never intended to tell anyone from the start. He added that strictly following guild rules would be one thing, but since the expedition ended with no real gains, leaving out a small detail in the report wouldn't matter. Hearing that, he smiled, realizing they really were as carefree as he first thought. He then asked Iris if she was fine with that too, and she said yes if it made him satisfied. He raised his pinky finger and said they should form a contract. His power spread across the room as he told Yumis and Grandy he would reveal secrets about himself and Iris, and that no disclosure would be allowed. He released magical chains that wrapped around Yumis and Grandy at the same time, binding their mouths, necks, and bodies. The chains vanished, and he declared the contract complete. Then he calmly said he didn't expect them to believe him, but admitted that he and Iris were ancient demons. That revelation left Yumis stunned and Grandy shocked. Yumis asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Then she paused, wondering if that was even the right reaction. He replied that he wasn't sure what the normal response should be, but judging by their faces, it seemed ancient demons had become legendary figures, like those in old books. Suddenly, Yumis stood up and almost shouted, asking if that wasn't obvious, saying she had researched it herself. But ancient demons were treated as myths full of exaggerations and delusions. Then she demanded to know how he could prove it. He answered that it was difficult to explain, but said his ability to alter magic spells should already be enough proof. He asked if he was right that such a thing wasn't easy to do, leaving Yumi speechless as she sat back down, defeated, realizing it was far more complex than she thought. Grandy commented that, while he suspected Luru wasn't ordinary, hearing he was an ancient demon was on a completely different level. Yeah, that's not your average backstory. Grandy pointed out that Luru's parents were nobles of the country, so his lineage should be recorded in the family tree, yet he was claiming to be from an ancient demon race. He admitted that was a fair question, but explained that reincarnation was a concept unique to demons and hard to describe. Then he remembered something and returned to the earlier question about what they would want to be if reborn. Yumis said she remembered and confirmed it. He then asked if she understood the concept of rebirth, and she proudly said yes, describing it as something romantic where the soul cycles. He wasn't entirely sure what she meant, but he could tell she grasped the basic idea. Still, he wondered how a concept unique to demons had become known among humans, especially since demons had been defeated long ago in war. Then he said that since she understood, it would make things easier to explain. He stated that he wasn't currently an ancient demon, but had been reborn into a human body. That's why his body and even his parents were human. Both Grandy and Yumis were shocked, realizing reincarnation was real. He admitted he had died in his past life for a certain reason, and that he and Iris had already known each other, though meeting again in the ruins was pure coincidence. Grandy asked Iris if her earlier explanation about seeking revenge against an enemy had been a lie. She said it wasn't a lie at all, as she had truly lost someone important, and that person was Luru. Grandy looked at her in confusion, so she clarified. She said Luru had been a friend of her father and always took good care of her whenever he had time. Even though she was young, she understood how deeply she admired him. However, it was a time of war, and no one could escape the conflict. She added that Luru was always at the center of the battlefield, and they, his subordinates, couldn't even be by his side at the end. Because of that, she chose to seek revenge against the world that took him from her. But she was captured during the process and ended up trapped in the device found in the ruins. After awakening, everything happened just as Grandy had witnessed. Grandy apologized for doubting her, but she disagreed. She admitted that while her explanation in the ruins wasn't a lie, it also wasn't entirely accurate. She told Grandy she appreciated his understanding at that moment. Yumis raised her voice and asked if she could speak. She said accepting them as ancient demons was one thing, but what bothered her was the earlier mention of subordinates and titles. It sounded like Iris had served Luru, meaning one ancient demon had served another. Before she could finish, he interrupted and confirmed she was correct. He admitted that he had once commanded all demons and that in his past life, he was the 100th Demon King. Yumis couldn't believe what she had just heard, that he was a Demon King. He awkwardly told her that it wasn't something he could really prove. More importantly, the fact that he and Iris were ancient demons was the real issue. His identity as a Demon King no longer held special meaning. However, Yumis stood up again and demanded to know what he was talking about, shouting that this was actually a very important matter. She then turned to Iris and asked if it was true that Lyrislia Nord had once been the Demon King. Iris proudly confirmed that it was. She explained that Liru's power was so overwhelming that during a battle he managed to blast a hole through a distant mountain. Even more stunned, asked how something like that was even possible. He began explaining that he remembered a human swordsman entering demon territory. But before he could continue, Grandy cut him off, suggesting they drop the topic of that swordsman for now. Grandy then admitted he was shocked to learn Liru had been the Demon King, and questioned why he was revealing this now and what it truly meant. He replied that the explanation was simple. "I just want to be honest with all of you and get along." He clarified that while he was indeed the Demon King's reincarnation, his current status was that of a 7-year-old child. That meant he couldn't act freely. On top of that, he had grown attached to life in the village and planned to stay there for a while, gathering information about the outside world. Grandy asked if that meant he wanted contact with the outside and whether he expected him to act as that bridge. He answered that more than just a connection, he hoped they would visit the village from time to time, just like they had now. It could also help him find future allies. Grandy noted that Liru had high expectations of them and admitted they weren't exactly overflowing with knowledge. Liru smiled and said that was completely fine. "More than anything, I just want someone to talk to once in a while. Is that too much to ask?" That caught Grandy off guard, and he replied that it wasn't a problem at all, though Liru was surprisingly straightforward about it. Grandy added that if that was all, he didn't mind. "It's just something I wanted to say." Grandy then explained that as adventurers they couldn't visit often without some form of compensation, so he proposed adding a condition. Liru asked what that condition was, but Grandy flipped the question and said he should join their clan. Iris, confused, asked what a clan even was. Grandy explained it was a mutual support organization for adventurers, made up of several groups working together as one. Unlike a party, it didn't have strict leadership. He added that it involved sharing skills and knowledge among experienced adventurers and helping each other out. Because of that, the concept had been gaining popularity. Liru asked Grandy if he was correct in thinking that adventurer registration wasn't allowed until the age of 14. Grandy confirmed and clarified he meant when Liru reached 14. He also mentioned that neither he nor Yumis belonged to any clan yet. Liru then asked which clan Grandy was referring to. Grandy answered simply that they planned to create one. When Liru turned 14, which also surprised Yumis, Grandy then asked what Liru thought about it. Liru was surprised that Grandy would go through the effort of forming a new clan, and noticed he didn't seem to intend to use him for the clan's benefit. He realized that learning from Grandy and the others would actually be a great opportunity for him. Extending his hand, he agreed. Grandy shook his hand as Liru promised that once he turned 14 and registered as an adventurer, he would join the clan they created. That became the condition for them to keep visiting. Later, Grandy waved goodbye and assured Liru they would build an incredibly famous clan, so he should look forward to it. Yumis added that she planned to return even before then. They watched them walk away. Iris then excitedly told Liru that in 7 years, she would become an adventurer. He agreed and called out to her seriously, which surprised her. "I want to find out why I was reincarnated as a human and what happened to the world after I was defeated by the hero. I want the truth. Will you come with me?" She saw both him and perhaps the shadow of her old uncle in him, and answered that it would be an honor. "I'll go with you wherever you go." He then said that before anything else, he needed to convince his mother and the others. She replied that if he asked sincerely, it didn't seem like it would be a problem. He agreed, knowing there had been signs. They had noticed him sneaking out of the village, but he still wondered what exactly he would say when the time came. His mother appeared, calling them to say the sweets were ready. Mom really said snack break, existential crisis later. A moment later, they were back home eating cake. When his mother asked if she was right in thinking he planned to leave the village, she said it was understandable. He choked on his food in shock and asked how she knew. She gently told him she had always felt he was searching for something that wasn't there, and was actually glad he had decided to wait until he turned 14. That made him wonder if he really had that kind of expression whenever he got lost in thought, thinking about a past he could never return to. His mother said she was fine with it but wasn't sure about his father. Iris, worried, asked if his father was the type to oppose it. Liru assured her he wasn't like that. Their father was calm, but there was a quiet strength to him. He was strict when it came to swordsmanship, which made Iris realize that earning Patrick Cadis Nora's approval wouldn't be easy. His mother then asked if he would fight with a sword to convince Patrick Cadis Nora if it came to that. He responded by asking if he would really have to defeat his own father in a sword fight, admitting it would be difficult since he wasn't particularly skilled yet, meaning he would need to train. Iris looked at him and thought that in moments like that he really did seem like an ordinary child. She couldn't help but worry, wondering if he had truly grown up in that home without realizing he still carried the regrets of his past. A moment later, they were in the kitchen when Iris asked his mother if she was the one who cooked everything. She replied that she did, by choice, and even the servants enjoyed her meals. Then she handed a lunchbox to Lyrislia Nord, and he thanked her as usual. She asked if she was right in assuming he would be playing with Rush and the others again that day, suggesting he introduce Iris to them. He confirmed, and she reacted cheerfully, saying that was exactly what she expected. Then she handed another lunchbox to Iris, leaving her confused. Iris offered to at least help wash the dishes, but his mother gently waved her off with a smile, saying it was fine and encouraging them to go have fun, while Iris quietly stared at the lunchbox in her hands. Soon after, outside, Liru introduced Iris to his friends and told them that Iris was now part of his family. He then explained to Iris that the 3 children were his childhood friends. As he introduced each of them, Iris realized how well he had blended into the human world. Rush stepped forward, blushing nervously, and reached out his hand to greet her. She was startled, but suddenly remembered a scene from her past where a mother shouted at her child to stay away, warning that touching a demon would bring a curse and to run at the sight of silver hair and red eyes. But Liru had told her that thousands of years had passed and things had changed. She smiled, realizing he was right. This was a completely different era. Time really said new patch update and rewrote society. Time had the power to reshape even the deepest prejudices. She accepted Rush's hand and shook it, though she grew confused when she noticed Yuri and Mei staring at her. She wondered if they held any hostility toward demons, but then reminded herself that in this era, demonic traits weren't widely recognized. And besides, she wasn't the center of attention right now. Liru broke her train of thought by asking Rush if it was true they were going to practice swordsmanship. Iris looked confused, while the two girls seemed slightly bothered. Rush awkwardly backed away and shouted for everyone to hurry up. Iris turned to Mei and Yuri, asking if Rush had done something wrong and pointing out that they seemed to be staring at him. Mei and Yuri exchanged glances and stayed silent. Then Mei asked Yuri if Iris might be a bit naive. Yuri replied that Iris didn't seem to realize Rush had recovered. Mei explained that Rush had turned red because he thought Iris was pretty, and his face had completely healed. Then Yuri, now concerned, wondered what would happen if Rush actually fell in love like that, and apologized to Iris, asking her to leave him alone if she wasn't truly interested. Iris was surprised, but then smiled as she began to understand what was going on. Mei scolded her, saying it wasn't something to laugh about. She immediately apologized, explaining she hadn't meant to make fun of Rush. I just realized I might have been a bit clueless. Yuri asked if she really just called herself clueless, and Iris nodded. Then she explained that she felt sorry for Rush, but her heart already belonged to someone else. Mei and Yuri became curious and said they'd love to know who it was. Iris replied that he was a little older than her, which relieved the girls. Yeah, Rush got eliminated from the competition real quick. Then they asked how much older he was. She hesitated for a moment and said it probably wasn't just 10 or 20 years, and at that point, she wasn't even sure how to measure it anymore. The two girls were stunned. Then they blushed as they realized she was talking about an adult. They commented that she was surprisingly mature for her age. Mei and Yuri looked around, trying to guess which older man it could be. When they concluded it had to be either Grandy or Patrick Catasnora, they grabbed her hands and said it would be a difficult love, but they would support her. Iris was confused, but had no choice except to go along with it. She realized she had given a vague answer without thinking. Then she remembered that long ago, she used to have conversations like this with her old friends. Back then, she didn't know whether what she felt was simple affection or something deeper. But before she could figure it out, Liru had died. Now she could never see her old friends or her family again. She snapped out of her thoughts when someone called her. Yuri asked if something was wrong since she seemed distracted. Mei shouted for her to come with them. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she smiled and agreed. She thought to herself that these girls were her first human friends. More than anything, having Liru, the most important person in her life, nearby meant she hadn't lost everything. She made a quiet promise that this time, she would do everything she could to avoid regrets. A few minutes later, while Liru and Rush practiced swordsmanship, the three girls sat nearby. Watching them, Yuri commented that she had been really surprised by Liru the other day. Iris asked what she meant, and Yuri realized Iris hadn't seen it. Yuri explained that she had heard how Iris was saved from the ruins, but added that the giants from the previous week had been defeated by Liru, which Yuri confirmed. Mei assumed Liru must be strong since he was Patrick Catasnora's son. Yuri replied that might be part of it, but she believed it was also because Liru had been putting in effort on his own. She mentioned hearing that Lurusli and Nord brought lunchboxes and trained hard every morning, which gave Iris an idea the next day in the kitchen. Iris approached his mother just as she was about to start cooking. She asked what it was, and after hesitating for a moment out of embarrassment, Iris managed to say she had a favor to ask. Midia responded enthusiastically, asking what it was, and saying a daughter's request was like a dream come true for a mother. But then Iris stammered and said it wasn't quite like that, asking if it was really okay for her to still be considered her daughter. Even though it was a bit late to ask, Midia crouched to meet her eye level and gently asked if she was worried about something like that, and if she had lost her parents. Midia then felt she should hug her and explained that before she knew it, so much time had passed. Seeing Iris like that, she truly wanted, from the bottom of her heart, to make her her daughter. That surprised Iris, since she hadn't expected Midia to feel so strongly, especially since she hadn't even shared everything yet. Midia added that she believed everyone needed someone to support them in a place they could always return to. No matter what happened, she promised Iris she genuinely wanted to give her that kind of place. She thought it might have something to do with Luru. Iris asked if that was the reason behind her feelings. Midia replied that it seemed Iris cared deeply about Luru. Maybe because when she woke up in the ruins, he was the first person she saw. She had noticed Iris seemed to have feelings for him, or at least that's what she believed. Iris then reminded Midia that she hadn't been officially adopted, which led Midia to ask if she expected to be treated like a servant. Iris said yes, but Midia simply stroked her head gently, saying that together with Luru she wanted to become a home for both of them. She thought having a family like that would be wonderful. Those words left Iris stunned, reminding her of her own family, which before she realized it, had already become something distant, something from the past. Now, Luru and his parents were slowly becoming something she cherished deeply. Iris wanted to live her life embracing that feeling. Midia was then surprised to see her crying over those painful memories, and quickly apologized for making her cry. She then reminded Iris that she still hadn't said what her favor was. Iris finally answered that she hoped Medea could teach her how to cook. That confused Medea for a moment. Iris explained that long ago Medea had taught her a little, but she thought her dear older brother had grown used to the taste of Medea's cooking. So now she wanted to learn to cook on her own. For Luru, Medea noticed her shyness, got excited, and immediately agreed. She then mentioned that according to the kingdom's laws, as long as they weren't blood-related, even siblings could marry, which made Iris even more embarrassed. Yeah, Medea just dropped that like it was casual conversation. Still, Medea agreed it was important to win Luru over through his stomach first, saying there was plenty of time and that she looked forward to teaching her the dishes she used to win over her husband, Patrick Caddis Nora. Medea then added that Larislia Nord was oddly affectionate toward Iris and wondered if having a little sister made him act that way. But Iris believed it was simply because she was the daughter of a friend. Even so, she realized the current situation worked in her favor. Iris then confidently told Medea she would do her best, making Medea cheerfully say that was the spirit she wanted to see. Minutes later, the two were busy preparing recipes together. When Iris asked how she met Patrick Caddis Nora, Medea replied that they first met about 15 years ago, when she was still working as a priestess. That surprised Iris, who asked if Medea had really been a priestess. Realizing she had never mentioned it before, Medea explained that she used to be a traveling priestess of the End Times religion. Although she didn't hold a very high rank, the religion was still one of the major organizations of that era. As a traveling priestess, she was welcomed in every town, had plenty of work, and always gave it her best. Iris commented on how unexpected that was, since priestesses were known for wielding sacred power strong enough to eliminate evil on the spot. However, she had never sensed anything like that from Medea, which made her wonder if the church had changed its practices in modern times. Medea laughed and admitted that looking back it all felt a bit embarrassing now. She recalled a time when she was traveling by carriage along a mountain path and was attacked by monsters. Despite having guards with her, the monsters were strong, and she genuinely thought she was going to die. Fortunately, Patrick Caddis Nora arrived just in time and protected her. Afterward, he looked back and asked if she was hurt. He spoke like a grumpy old man, but in that moment something sparked inside her. Right then and there, she believed she would marry that man. Iris, confused, asked why she said she would marry him instead of simply saying she wanted to. Medea laughed again and said she just knew it would happen. She asked where he was from, thanked him, and after they parted, requested a transfer to a church near where he worked. Iris was stunned by her determination. Medea added that if someone truly loves another person, they should at least do that, and that the real challenge only begins afterward. At the time, Patrick Caddis Nora, with his striking looks and reputation as a promising young noble, was extremely popular. There wasn't a single girl who didn't like him. Every day, women gathered outside the fortress where he worked, handing gifts to the guards in hopes they would reach him. But Patrick Caddis Nora was still just an ordinary knight, and he received so many items like sword belts and clothes that they no longer fit in his room. At some point, he ended up giving many of them away to other soldiers. That's why Medea chose to give him something he couldn't simply throw aside. She approached a guard and introduced herself as a woman Patrick had once helped on a mountain road. She handed over a basket, asking him to pass it along to Patrick Caddis Nora if possible. When Iris asked what it contained, Medea confirmed it was food. Patrick Caddis Nora ate it, and when the container was returned, there was a letter inside. In the letter, he thanked her and asked if she'd like to go out with him sometime. He gave Medea a gentle smile, realizing she had truly won Patrick Caddis Nora over through his stomach. He then started wondering if the same tactic would work for him. And yes, he was obviously talking about Luru. He asked if Medea thought the plan would work on him too. Medea replied that since Luru was somewhat similar to Patrick Caddis Nora, it should work. She asked Iris if that made her want to try. Iris, letting out a small laugh, admitted that it did. With renewed enthusiasm, Medea became determined to teach Iris the secret cooking techniques Luru liked. Iris responded eagerly, saying she was looking forward to it. Later, outside, they sat together on a mat laid on the ground. Beside them were sandwiches prepared by Iris. Luru took a bite and asked if she had made them. She said yes, though she shyly admitted her mother had helped a little. She mentioned she timed everything carefully to present a dish she had recently practiced. Luru noted that must be why it tasted so good. He then said that if he ever became an adventurer, he might start gathering ingredients and trying dishes from demon tribes. He wondered out loud if it would be okay to ask for her help when that time came. She agreed immediately. He then said that after a short break, they would resume training. She pointed out that he seemed especially motivated today. He confirmed it and explained that their father would be returning tomorrow. The next day, a carriage arrived at the village, and someone stepped out. The man removed his glasses and, upon seeing him, said it had been a while. That man was his handsome father. He took Patrick Caddis Nora's suitcase and asked if he could stay for long. Patrick Caddis Nora replied that his stay would be brief, but he would have time to train him in Rush. He said he understood and added that Rush seemed especially excited this time. He asked Patrick Caddis Nora to tell Rush not to overdo it, which made Patrick question if something was going on. He replied that he would explain later, and that a lot had happened recently. Patrick Caddis Nora agreed and followed, asking where Medea was. He said Medea was at home preparing lunch with Iris, which confused Patrick Caddis Nora. Patrick Caddis Nora remembered reading in a letter that Iris would be staying with their adopted daughter, and wondered why that was happening and whether he was okay with it. He responded that it didn't bother him at all, since Iris was polite and a good girl. Surprised by the praise, Patrick Caddis Nora jokingly asked if Iris was his girlfriend. He replied that there was nothing like that, especially since she would become his sister. He added that Patrick Caddis Nora didn't know, but Iris was actually the daughter of a friend. Patrick Nora then pointed out that, according to the kingdom's laws, marriage between siblings without blood relation was not forbidden. He explained that in such cases, the usual practice was to marry first and then be adopted into the family. However, he clarified that this wasn't about legality. Patrick Nora asked if it was fair to assume that the chances of a relationship between him and Iris were low. Mentioning it seemed he saw her as a real sister, he agreed, confirming that was exactly what he meant. A few minutes later, they arrived home, where Media, Iris, and the maids welcomed Patrick Nora. Patrick Nora happily announced that he was finally home, and remarked that things must have been difficult for Media. She replied that everything had been perfectly fine. Patrick Nora then noticed Iris and asked if she was Iris, to which she shyly confirmed. He warmly told her he had heard about her from Media and thanked her for preparing the food. He then suggested they all go inside and talk in the dining room. Moments later, Patrick Nora began explaining that magical tools were becoming popular in the royal capital, especially among high-ranking nobles and officials. In short, influential households used them frequently, and many were imported from abroad. His family listened to the story and concluded that asking the grandfather for help had been the right choice. He knew his father's stories were always interesting, but usually simplified for children. Besides, since Patrick Nora was a knight of the kingdom, the more complex details weren't easy to follow. He figured there was no way he'd get to hear the deeper parts anyway. Patrick Nora then turned to Media and brought up what had been written in the letter. She replied gently, asking if he meant the idea of adopting Iris as their daughter, adding that it wouldn't be a bad idea since Iris was so adorable. Patrick Nora agreed right away, and said that from what he had heard, Iris seemed kind-hearted and got along well with Luru. Iris bowed politely and thanked him for the compliment. Patrick Nora chuckled, pointing out how well-mannered she was. He then promised to send the adoption documents once he returned to the royal capital, and Media thanked him warmly. Luru watched his family getting along, but soon frowned, knowing he had something important to say. He told Patrick Nora that there was something he wanted to discuss. Patrick Nora asked what it was, and Luru confidently declared that when he turned 14, he wanted to become an adventurer. Patrick Nora replied that it was acceptable, even though being nobles made things complicated, but it was still possible. He added that even if Luru became an adventurer, he could still inherit the family estate, and if needed, they could always adopt someone. There were options. However, he warned that the life of an adventurer was far from easy, so a challenge had to be set. Patrick Nora gave him a condition to meet before his 14th birthday. He had to match his father's swordsmanship. Patrick Nora, a master swordsman at the peak of his skill in the kingdom of Leonhard, locked eyes with Luru, who smiled upon seeing that fiery determination. Patrick Nora then added that if he failed to reach that level, he would die quickly out there, even as an adventurer. Luru recognized that same intense gaze, the one he had once seen in warriors who challenged him back when he was the Demon King. He responded calmly and swore that by his 14th birthday, he would become a swordsman his father could acknowledge. Patrick Nora, proud of his son's resolve, said he believed Luru would grow strong. Media, laughing lightly, remarked that she would need to prepare lunch for Patrick Nora the next day as well. He agreed cheerfully, then whispered to Luru that he was happy, and Luru could feel that sincerity. Looking down at his hand, Luru knew his swordsmanship was still lacking. His physical strength wasn't enough yet, and his control over magic had not returned to its former level. Even so, he smiled, aware that many challenges lay ahead. A few days later, at the training grounds, Rush charged forward and swung his sword at Luru, but Luru blocked it with ease and countered. However, Rush adjusted mid-motion and managed to stop the follow-up attack. Luru asked if he could keep up with that speed. Rush replied that he had improved, explaining that Patrick Nora had put him through intense training over the past few days. He noted that his quick movements had gotten better, though he still couldn't execute a proper counterattack. Luru offered to teach him and suggested they surprise Patrick Nora next time, which immediately got Rush excited. Yeah, bro, unlocked training arc mode. Meanwhile, Iris sat nearby, quietly watching them. She knew that besides practicing modern sword techniques with Rush, Luru had also been secretly training his magic at dawn. When no one was around, she reflected that even though Laruslia Nord was just as busy as when he had been the Demon King, reincarnation hadn't changed his constant involvement in something. Still, she felt happy seeing how much more content he seemed now. Even so, she couldn't shake the feeling that while Laru worked so hard, she herself wasn't doing enough, and that didn't sit right with her. Just then, someone called out to her from behind. When she turned, she saw Mi and Yuri approaching, asking for a favor. Yuri and Mi told Iris they wanted her to become their mentor, catching her completely off guard. She replied that if it was about dancing, she had some experience, though she wasn't particularly skilled in other areas. Mi quickly interrupted, saying that wasn't what they meant. They wanted a mentor in combat, and they asked if she would take that role. Yuri confirmed, apologizing for bringing it up so suddenly. Mi explained that she had tried to stop Rush from becoming an adventurer, but he refused to give up. Yuri added that at this rate, Rush would really leave the village, so they had decided to become adventurers too, and for that, they needed combat training. Yuri continued, explaining that a few days earlier, they had discussed this decision with Luru. At first, Luru was surprised to hear their plan, but once they explained that it would be dangerous for Rush to go alone, he understood they wanted to stay by his side. Yuri then said that was why they wanted to train, and asked whether Luru thought Patrick Nora would help them. Luru had replied that Patrick Nora would likely train them, but instead of focusing only on swordsmanship, they should consider becoming mid-range support fighters. That suggestion caught them off guard, prompting them to ask what he meant. He explained that mid-range support referred to those who assist from behind, using magic or tactics to support frontline fighters. He added that strengthening the formation would give the frontline swordsmen more freedom to act. And since Rush was likely better in close combat, having their support would be crucial. Knowing Rush well, Luru suggested they ask Iris for help. Yuri then turned to Iris, explaining that was why they had come to her, since she was knowledgeable in magic and quite strong. Iris agreed that Luru's idea was excellent. She said she didn't mind teaching them, but warned that her techniques were quite unique, and the training would likely be intense. Both Yuri and Mei agreed without hesitation, saying they were fully committed, and even claimed the harder the training, the better, which caught Iris off guard. She asked why they were willing to push themselves that far. Mei answered firmly that it was because they wanted to stay by Rush's side. She explained that whenever something caught Rush's interest, he would chase it without a second thought. Her expression turned serious as she recalled the incident with the giant at the ruins. Luru had said how strong Rush was, but back then they had been so terrified of the giant that all they could do was hide behind him. If something like that happened again, it would become a lifelong regret. Yuri added that as they were now, they would only hold him back. That's why they couldn't just follow Rush around anymore. They needed to become strong enough to protect him. Hearing that, Iris remembered the time she had wished for strength herself. She stood up, saying she understood their feelings and the desire to protect someone important. In that case, she said, there was no reason to refuse. However, she warned that since they had asked for the harshest training possible, she wouldn't go easy on them. She asked if they were truly prepared. Both Yuri and Mei were shaken by the intense red determination in her eyes, but even while trembling, they begged her to train them. Not gonna lie, that look screamed no mercy mode activated. Shortly after, Luru and Rush were wrapping up their training for the day and heading home. When Rush commented that he felt like he was finally getting the hang of it, Luru agreed but reminded him that real combat was still far ahead. He told Rush there was no need to rush and that they should rest for now. Suddenly, they heard shouting nearby. Both froze when they saw Iris yelling at Mei and Yuri, telling them not to stop. She explained that enemies strike when people are exhausted, and while they relaxed, their allies could die. Luru and Rush were shocked as they watched Mei and Yuri struggle to stand, their bodies trembling. Meanwhile, Iris kept shouting that if they truly wanted to protect what mattered, they had to kill the enemy before the enemy killed them. Rush was visibly shaken by how ruthless Iris sounded, and Luru felt the same. However, Luru recognized that this method came from that infamous madman of the demon army, and that explained how Iris had grown so strong in just a few years. Luru then turned to Rush and said they should train a bit more before heading back. Rush agreed. Luru smiled, thinking this wasn't the time to rest. 7 years would pass in the blink of an eye, and the real moment would arrive sooner than expected. 14 years later, the day to face his father had finally come. Mei and Iris stood ready, watching closely. Meanwhile, Patrick Cadis Nora and Luru faced each other at the center. Patrick Cadis Nora said he had been waiting for this day. Luru replied that he had been waiting as well. Patrick Cadis Nora said that since this would be their final match, they should go over the rules. It would be a pure sword duel, with no magic allowed. He added that, even though Luraslia Nord had grown stronger, he was still a child, and brute strength would give Patrick Cadis Nora the advantage. For that reason, Patrick Cadis Nora was using a magical tool to suppress his strength, carefully adjusted so their physical abilities were equal. Luru acknowledged that, in other words, it would be a true test of skill. Patrick Cadis Nora confirmed that was exactly the intention. Luru reminded himself that the reason he had mastered modern swordsmanship was to conceal his abilities as the former Demon King, keeping them as a hidden trump card. The test would mean nothing if he relied on anything else. Then Patrick Cadis Nora commented that Luru had become strong and believed he would surpass him one day. He then asked if that was Luru's goal. Luru confirmed and added that if he surpassed him, he planned to become the next swordsmanship instructor of the Royal Knights. Patrick Cadis Nora was surprised. He had never expected to hear that from his son. He told him that if he took that role, he wouldn't need to worry about finding a successor. However, for now, he wasn't ready to give up the position, not while he still had a wife to care for. Luru replied that it was serious, but he also had a sister who had always stood by him, so he couldn't afford to lose. Patrick laughed, noting that Luru had learned to express himself well, and raised his wooden sword. He asked if they should begin. Luru agreed. Even though he had grown stronger, Luru knew his human body was still inferior to what he had as the Demon King. He focused on Patrick Cadis Nora's movements, listening to his breathing and the shifting of his muscles, but still lacked enough information to predict his father's first move. He understood that to assess him properly, he would have to attack first. He moved forward, thinking that if he initiated, Patrick Cadis Nora would likely dodge and counter. He swung his sword toward Patrick Cadis Nora's side, just as expected. Patrick Cadis Nora evaded and raised his sword for a downward strike. Luru instantly targeted the opening on Patrick Cadis Nora's side. Patrick Cadis Nora managed to block it, stepped back, praised Luru's technique, and asked why he hadn't fought like that before. Luru simply reminded him that he himself had said it was wise to keep a few tricks in reserve. Luru pressed forward, locking blades and mentioning he had thought through many strategies. Patrick Cadis Nora blocked the next strike. Then he loosened his grip, letting the blade slide downward to disperse the force of the attack. Luru shouted, spun his blade, and launched another strike. Patrick Cadis Nora parried and remarked that the fundamentals of Luru's technique were clearly the ones he had taught him. Patrick Nora realized the style he had passed on focused on cutting off escape routes, cornering the opponent step by step. But Luru's version felt different and relentless. No matter how much the opponent tried to run, Luru chased them down and crushed them. It wasn't illogical, but it didn't follow standard patterns either. It felt like Luru had real battlefield experience. Patrick Nora asked if he was a genius, but Luru denied it. Patrick Nora replied that his technique resembled that of a rational fighter, shaped through combat experience. Luru was surprised Patrick Nora figured that out after only a few exchanges. Lurus Leonord knew it was true. He carried years of combat experience from a past life and had merged the Demon King's aggressive style with modern orthodox swordsmanship, refining both. Given that, Patrick Nora noted that customizing a high-level art like traditional swordsmanship shouldn't come so easily, but chose not to press further. Besides, both of them were nearing their limits. Patrick raised his sword and began releasing part of his magical power, declaring the next move would end the duel. Luru smiled, recognizing the technique. It was pure simplicity, embodying everything about orthodox swordsmanship. Even so, it was more refined than anything Rush or even Luru could currently execute. Luru lifted his own sword, confident he had a counter ready. Patrick Nora charged forward, shouting that he was coming. Luru answered with equal confidence, telling him to bring it on. Both rushed in at the same time, delivering a single decisive strike aimed at each other. Hours later, he woke up and saw people drinking around him, making him wonder where he was and if it was a tavern. Iris, sitting beside him, told him he had finally woken up. He asked why they were there. She explained that during the earlier fight with Patrick Nora, he lost and passed out. That made him recall the moment Patrick Nora struck him with that final blow. He had lost consciousness, accepted the defeat calmly, and asked Iris why there was a celebration, especially since he had lost. He questioned whether this wasn't supposed to be a test he had failed. Iris explained it wasn't about winning or losing. After all, even Rush and the others had been defeated by Patrick Nora, yet they still set out on their journey confidently months earlier. It clicked as Iris continued, explaining the banquet was to celebrate his departure. She then pointed at Patrick Nora, who was proudly telling everyone how Luru's birth had been easy and how those tiny hands had gripped his finger so tightly, making him certain Luru would grow strong. Iris noted that Patrick Nora had been going on non-stop and was already on his third round of the same story. Yeah, bro unlocked infinite storytelling mode. Luru asked how Patrick Nora never got tired, and Iris replied that drunk people were always like that, adding that no matter the era, she remembered similar moments from her past, recalling her father drinking and chatting with Luru's Demon King self. Hours passed, and the villagers slowly returned home, while others passed out from drinking too much. Meanwhile, Media approached him while Iris slept on his shoulder. Media gently said he had worked hard and praised him for doing well. Noticing Iris asleep beside him, Media asked if she was interrupting something. He replied that he was just about to wake Iris. Iris quickly pulled away from his shoulder, embarrassed, but he said the timing was perfect. Media then asked Iris if they should head back to sleep. Iris agreed, apologizing for falling asleep on her brother's shoulder. He assured her he didn't mind at all, saying he was just about to tell Media he would head home soon. Patrick Nora walked over and sat beside him, asking if the star of the show was already planning to leave. Media said they would head back first, and Iris gave a small bow in farewell. He nodded, telling them to take care, and watched as they left the tavern. Patrick Nora then asked if he was feeling better now. He replied that he was fine, though he had hoped to achieve a clear victory and pass the test, leaving Patrick Nora briefly speechless. Patrick Nora suddenly asked why he didn't fight seriously, catching him completely off guard, but then burst into laughter, saying it was just a joke and there was no need to look so shocked. Luru told him not to say strange things out of nowhere, and Patrick Nora, still laughing, agreed. Then Patrick Nora asked if he was right in thinking Luru couldn't fight seriously because he was determined to keep certain things hidden. Luru looked at him, wondering when he had figured it out. He apologized and explained he never intended to hide it forever. He just thought it was better to keep it as a hidden card for now. Patrick Nora admitted he had taught him the value of having a hidden card, but added that he expected Luru to give everything in the final fight. Seeing the slight frustration on Patrick Nora's face, Luru smiled. It was obvious Patrick Nora had realized he was holding something back. Even if he didn't know it was ancient demonic power, since magic had been forbidden in the test, Luru had still fought with everything he had, at least everything within human limits. If he had used his Demon King powers, it would have required magic, which he had deliberately avoided. He reflected that by doing so, he had technically deceived Patrick Nora. Even so, he knew it was rare for his father to show that level of emotion. And if it were Patrick Nora, he believed that even after learning the truth, he wouldn't be afraid or spread the information unnecessarily. He then asked Patrick Nora if they could fight again, but this time with no restrictions, and Patrick Nora, intrigued, asked if he truly meant going all out. Luru nodded and added that if they were going to fight, he wanted Patrick Nora to give everything as well. Patrick Nora looked confused at first, then agreed, mentioning he hadn't held back as much as Luru might have thought in their previous match. Luru shook his head and clarified that he meant both of them should use magic, and that Patrick Nora should not rely on the artifact that suppressed his strength. Patrick Nora frowned and asked if Luru was mocking him. He reminded Luru that he was one of the kingdom's top swordsmen, and now his son was asking him to fight seriously against a 14-year-old. Yeah, pride just took critical damage. Luru only gave a faint smirk, thinking that this intensity was exactly what he needed. Calmly, he told Patrick Cadis Nora that if he didn't fight seriously, he wouldn't be able to give his all either. He added that he would be leaving the day after tomorrow, so if they fought again the next day, no one would be around to see it. Patrick stared at him for a long moment before agreeing. He warned Luru that if they were really going to fight, he wouldn't hold back, and if Luru got hurt and his journey was delayed, he wouldn't be allowed to complain. Luru replied that those were the words he should have said himself, catching Patrick Kedienora off guard and making him laugh. Patrick Kedienora finally accepted, declaring that as Luru wished, he would show him the full power of the greatest swordsman in the kingdom of Leonard. The next morning, before sunrise, Luru took out a coin. Patrick Cadis Nora noticed and asked what it was for. Luru explained it would serve as the signal to start the fight. He suggested tossing it into the air and beginning the moment it hit the ground. Patrick Cadis Nora replied that he was ready whenever Luru was. He just had to throw it. Once he felt ready, Luru teased him, saying he looked confident and that he would accept the idea. Then Luru released his ancient aura, catching Patrick off guard. Patrick Cadis Nora admitted he hadn't expected Luru to be this strong. Luru clarified that he still wasn't at full power. There was still a portion of his strength he couldn't fully control. Patrick Cadis Nora raised his sword, saying he didn't fully understand, but what mattered was that Luruslia Nord was serious, and it was time. Luru agreed, placed the coin on his thumb, and flicked it high into the air. The coin spun upward, then slowly descended until it struck the ground. At that instant, both he and Patrick Cadis Nora braced themselves and rushed forward, their blades clashing at the center with a sharp crack. Patrick Cadis Nora admitted he was surprised. He hadn't expected the gap between them to be so small. Luru replied that he hadn't expected it either, and admitted he still had a long way to go. Patrick Cadis Nora tightened his grip on his sword, saying he had planned to end the fight with a decisive strike. The boy was pushed slightly backward, creating distance, but immediately surged forward again, positioning his blade for a frontal attack. Patrick Cadis Nora recognized the stance and identified it as a thrust. He considered dodging, but quickly realized that even if he did, a follow-up attack would be waiting. He remembered that just the day before, he could have kept up, but now he couldn't match Luru's speed, leaving only one viable option: deflect the strike to the side. Luru, meanwhile, was surprised by Patrick Cadis Nora's positioning and impressed by his intent to block directly, knowing it would reduce speed and create an opening, so he decided to take the risk. He fully committed to the thrust, but Patrick Cadis Nora swung his sword downward with force, knocking Luru's blade aside. Believing the fight was over, Patrick Cadis Nora declared victory with excitement, but to his shock, he saw Luru holding a second sword along with an ancient magical power. Yeah, plot twist just dropped. Luru questioned who said it was over, then swung his blade with force, causing Patrick Cadis Nora to collapse, satisfied. He stated that it seemed he had won. Moments later, Luru walked slowly, carrying Patrick Cadis Nora on his back. With his entire body aching, he realized that since childhood he had gradually increased the amount of magic he could use, but Patrick had been surprisingly strong to keep up. He had pushed his magic far beyond what his body was used to, and now he was paying the price with intense muscle pain. He wondered if he would always have to endure this kind of strain just to expand his magical capacity. As he reflected, he thought about the heroes of history, humans who had repeatedly surpassed their magical limits to defeat the most powerful demons. He realized their efforts were truly extraordinary, and it inspired him to fight at that level someday. When he returned, Iris greeted them and asked how the fight went. He assumed Iris had already sensed the magic he used, but simply said that he had won. It hadn't been a perfect victory, he admitted, but if they fought again, he was confident he would win without question. He added that Patrick Cadis Nora had been far stronger than he expected, surprising Iris. She remarked that it was rare for him to praise someone openly, and asked if Patrick Cadis Nora was really that skilled. He confirmed and added that, depending on the equipment, if Patrick Cadis Nora had been born in that era, he might have been able to compete. That left Iris stunned, as it meant Patrick Cadis Nora was on the same level as her biological father. At that moment, Patrick Cadis Nora stirred and asked where he was. Luru answered that they had returned to the village. Patrick, recognizing the surroundings, accepted his defeat. He slowly climbed down from Luru's back, remarking that he always believed the world was vast, but never expected his first loss in years to come from his own son. As Patrick Cadis Nora struggled to move, Luru supported him and warned him not to push himself. It was clear Patrick Cadis Nora had used more magic than he realized. Patrick Cadis Nora then asked Iris if she had noticed anything. Iris replied that she saw them leave early in the morning and waited for them at the village entrance. Patrick Cadis Nora asked if she truly understood how strong Luru was, and she explained that when Luru rescued her from the ruins, she had already glimpsed that power. Patrick reassured them, saying that with the two of them together, he no longer worried about them becoming adventurers, but reminded them there would be times when strength alone wouldn't solve everything. When those moments came, they should never hesitate to rely on others. People like him, media, Grandy, or anyone they could trust. He asked if they understood. Luruslia Nord reflected that if strength alone could solve everything, then simply teaming up with the hero would have been enough. But the world didn't work that way. He nodded, assuring Patrick Cadis Nora that he understood and would remember the advice. Patrick Cadis Nora smiled warmly at them and turned to walk ahead, reminding them it was time to go home and start packing for the journey. Luru and Iris exchanged a knowing look and a quiet smile. Then they followed Patrick Cadis Nora back home. The next day, a carriage waited at the village entrance. The villagers had gathered to say their farewells. Standing beside their parents, Media watched the moment and said it was finally time to leave. The villagers said they weren't going off to war or anything, and they were sure news about them would spread quickly. After all, they were students of Patricatus Nora. Media smiled gently and said she had never really worried about them, but her eyes filled with tears as she added that they had both grown into such remarkable people. She hugged him tightly and told them not to do anything reckless and to take good care of each other. And that's where the story comes to an end, for now. If you enjoyed it, you already know what to do. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Comment Reborn Baby down below. The more comments we get, the faster I'll bring the continuation. I'll also leave 2 recommended videos from the channel for you to check out. See you in the next video.